Okay, so you want to own a 7-Eleven. Here's the number that gets people in the door. On some stores, the franchise fee is $0. Not a typo. Zero. You can, in the right circumstances, walk into 7-Eleven's franchise program without writing a six-figure check to the corporation just to get a license. That sounds like the cheapest door into business ownership in America. It is not. Because here's the part that changes everything. After you sign, you will not own the building your store sits in. You will not own the land underneath it. You will not own the walk-in cooler, the Slurpee machines, or the shelving your inventory sits on. In 7-Eleven's core franchise model, the corporation owns all of it and leases it back to you. So before you've sold a single hot dog, the thing you assumed you were buying, a store, was never actually for sale. What you're buying is something much narrower and much stranger, and it's worth understanding exactly what that is before you sign anything. Because by the time you're done running the numbers, you'll realize the $0 entry fee wasn't generosity. It was 7-Eleven pricing the one thing you're actually acquiring at what it's actually worth. And stick around, because by the end of this, you'll see exactly why over 1,000 of these stores have closed in the last 2 years alone, and why, if you're the franchisee standing in one of them, that was never a decision you got a vote on. 7-Eleven runs two different franchise structures, and which one you land in changes everything about what you actually control. The traditional model is the common path. Here, 7-Eleven selects the site, owns or leases the land, builds or acquires the store, and owns every piece of equipment inside it, the coolers, the registers, the food prep gear. You're not building a 7-Eleven. You're stepping into one 7-Eleven already decided was worth operating, in a location it already chose, with a sales history it already generated before you walked in. The other path, the business conversion program, flips part of that. You already own or lease commercial real estate, maybe an independent convenience store, and convert it into a 7-Eleven. You keep the land and building. 7-Eleven still owns some core equipment, and you adopt its branding, supply chain, and operating system. It's a small slice of the franchisee population and only available to people who already own a qualifying store. Either way, approval isn't casual. 7-Eleven requires a minimum net worth around $150,000 and liquid capital of $50,000 to $150,000, plus a formal interview, background check, and credit check. And critically, 7-Eleven is choosing you for a specific existing store, not handing you a blank map. Which store you get depends on what's open in your market and how badly 7-Eleven wants that slot filled. And you're not signing on forever. The standard agreement runs a 15-year term with one renewal option, contingent on hitting 7-Eleven's performance and compliance bar. Cleanliness, shrinkage, tobacco compliance fall short, and renewal isn't guaranteed. You're not just leasing the building, you're leasing the right to keep leasing it, on a clock that only resets if the corporation agrees you've earned it. You're not applying to start a business. You're applying to be trusted, on a fixed term, with someone else's asset. Let's talk about what the $0 franchise fee actually means, because it's the most misleading number in the entire pitch. The initial franchise fee for a 7-Eleven ranges anywhere from $0 to over $1 million, and that range isn't random, it's set by the store itself. A brand new location in a strong market, or one with a long, proven sales history, commands a fee at the high end. A struggling location, weak sales, sitting empty, dragging on the balance sheet, can carry a fee of zero, because 7-Eleven would rather have any qualified operator running it than have it sit dark. That's the trap. A low or zero franchise fee doesn't mean a low total investment. Depending on the store, total initial investment, franchise fee, inventory, opening costs, deposits, working capital has been reported anywhere from roughly $37,000 to over $1. 6 million B. The number in the ad is a marketing number. The number that actually determines whether you can do this is total investment, and it swings by more than 40x store to store. 7-Eleven doesn't just set that number, it also offers to finance a chunk of it, up to 65% of the initial franchise fee, plus an open account credit line for ongoing inventory and operating expenses that fluctuates with your sales. On paper, that lowers the cash bar to get in. In practice, it means the same company that owns your building, sets your product mix, and takes the majority of your gross profit can also finance your inventory and your entry fee. Every lever that could give you independence, the real estate, the equipment, even a slice of your own starting capital, runs back through the same relationship. And even at the high end, even writing a check for well over $1 million, you still, in the traditional model, do not own the real estate you just funded your way into. Compare that to a McDonald's, where franchisees finance their own building improvements on corporate-owned land, but carry real equity in the equipment and build-out they fund. 7-Eleven is more extreme. The corporation owns essentially everything physical, and your capital buys inventory, working capital, and the right to operate, not equity in a hard asset you could ever sell. Here's what nobody puts on the recruiting brochure. 7-Eleven doesn't primarily make money off you the way most franchisors do. Most franchise systems, the Subways, the Dunkins of the world, charge a royalty in the mid-single digits, calculated on your gross sales, sell more, pay more, but the cut is modest and tied to revenue, not profit. 7-Eleven is structurally different. Instead of a royalty on sales, it takes a percentage of your gross profit, sales minus the cost of the merchandise you sold, and that percentage runs between 50% and 57%, plus a marketing fee around 1% of gross profit. Every week, before you've paid an employee, covered your utilities, or kept a dollar for yourself, 7-Eleven has already collected roughly half of what your store made. Stack that against everything else, 7-Eleven is your landlord, collecting rent through the profit split instead of a lease check. It's your equipment provider, owning the coolers and registers. It's increasingly your lender, financing your entry fee and inventory through its own credit programs. And it's your supplier, setting much of what you're allowed to stock. 4 revenue relationships collapsed into one counterparty, the same one deciding every renewal cycle whether you keep the store at all. That's the actual business model. 7-Eleven owns the real estate and equipment and takes the majority of gross profit, while the franchisee absorbs almost all the operational risk, labor, shrinkage, the day-to-day grind of a 24-hour retail box without the corporation ever carrying that labor risk itself. You're not buying a store. You're buying the right to operate 7-Eleven's asset, absorb its risk, and split what's left roughly in half in 7-Eleven's favor. In October 2024, 7-Eleven announced it was closing 444 stores across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, roughly 3% of its North American footprint, citing declining sales, a drop in cigarette purchases, and what the company called a deteriorating spending climate among lower-income customers. The company projected the closures would deliver a $30 million operating income benefit in the near term, and roughly $110 million to its annualized run rate going forward. That wasn't a one-time correction. It was the start of a pattern. In its fiscal 2026 plan, 7-Eleven announced it would close another 645 North American stores, while simultaneously opening 205 new, larger, food-forward locations the same year, as part of a strategic pivot in store format. Net effect: the North American store count is projected to fall from more than 13,000 in 2024 to roughly 12,272 by the end of fiscal 2026, even as the company keeps opening new stores elsewhere in its own footprint. Here's the part that matters for anyone thinking about signing a franchise agreement. In the traditional model, those closed buildings, that equipment, that real estate, it was already 7-Eleven-esque. When a store closes, the corporation isn't losing a facility it built with a franchisee's money and now has to walk away from. It's reclaiming an asset it already owned, one it can redeploy, release, rebuild into a food-forward format, or sell. The franchisee operating that store, meanwhile, loses their business, their invested working capital, and because in the traditional model there was never real estate equity to begin with, walks away with substantially less to show for it than an owner in almost any other franchise system would in the same situation. The corporation is trimming and reshaping a portfolio it fully owns. The franchisee is losing a livelihood built on an asset they never held title to in the first place, on a timeline the franchisee didn't choose and, most of the time, didn't see coming. Let's run the numbers on an actual store. The average 7-Eleven location generates somewhere between $1 million and $2 million in annual gross sales. Call it $1. $5 million for mid-performing store. After the cost of goods sold, you're left with a gross profit, and 7-Eleven takes its 50 to 57% cut off the top of that, plus the marketing fee. What's left has to cover your labor, your insurance, your utilities, your losses from shrinkage and spoilage, and only then becomes your income. In a good year, strong foot traffic, a well-run crew, low shrinkage, maybe a fuel margin tailwind if your store sells gas, franchisee net income has been reported in the range of roughly $50,000 to $150,000 annually. These are industry analyst and franchisee reported estimates rather than numbers 7-Eleven itself publishes, so treat them as informed ranges, not audited fact. Some multi-unit operators, running several stores at once to spread fixed costs like management labor across a bigger base, do meaningfully better than a single store owner, which is part of why 7-Eleven actively courts multi-unit operators rather than only single store franchisees. That's the number that gets circulated at franchise expos, and it's real for the stores that hit it. In a bad year, the same structure works against you fast. Cigarette sales, historically one of the highest margin categories in the store, have been declining industry-wide, and that's a direct hit to gross profit before you've done anything wrong. Add inflation squeezing your lower income customer base, a slow month of shrinkage from theft, or a maintenance issue on equipment you don't own and can't simply decide to replace yourself. And that same $1, $5 million a year store can swing from a $100,000 personal income year to one where, after payroll and the corporate profit split, you've effectively worked a full year for a fraction of that, or worse, at a loss you're funding out of savings. All while roughly half of whatever gross profit you did generate was already gone to 7-Eleven before you saw a dollar of it. And if that bad year runs long enough to threaten your net worth covenant or your compliance standing, it isn't just this year's income at risk, it's whether you get the store back at renewal at all. You didn't buy a store, you leased a job from the one landlord who also happens to be your business partner, your supplier, and the majority shareholder in every dollar you make. You don't get to own the building, but you can own the subscribe button. Tap it.